you. Thanks for joining us here tonight.
My pleasure, Roop. Good to be with you again. A lot going on.
A lot going on, including what we don't know happened in the Situation Room. We can only try to color in some lines here before the meeting and what we're hearing on social media after. Based on all of that, what do you suppose happened in that room?
Well, that was about a 2-hour meeting. It was well announced that the president was going to be in the Situation Room, which is basically a smaller room in the White House compound. To go on for 2 hours was pretty significant, but also to exit there without an announcement is equally significant. This deal to sort of work with Iran is not necessarily a deal for ceasefire. If anything, it is more a short memorandum of understanding to get both sides to at least agree on some basics for a 60-day ceasefire so they can get to the bigger issues. However, no announcement tonight after the meeting in the Situation Room tells me that there is pause, at least in what came out of that 2-hour meeting.
I'd like to tap into some of your, contextual experience, having worked for 2 presidents as an advisor. Oftentimes, nowadays, it seems like everything plays out on social media in real time. We've been spoiled. We click on, we go, what's the latest? But years ago, when you were working for Bush and Clinton at some point, meetings like this happened, and you really didn't hear about it until the next night's news.
I think that's part of the problem, is that we hear so much. And so we, come on air, we try to do analysis, we're reading on tweets and posts. What we can do is look at this as a much broader context. It's not just Iran and the United States. You have Israel basically at war with Hezbollah. When you think about how confusing this deal is to get all sides together, Iran still supports 4 proxy networks. And part of their initial deal was, look, hands off Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is an identified terror network that today Israel is striking. At the same time, gas prices, are continuing to rise. We have fertilizer concerns. Buying a ticket has expanded. And over the weekend, I think there was some hope. We heard about a Camp David initial meeting between the administration bringing everybody together. That was nixed. They stayed local, and there were not a lot of headlines. Also critical today that I noticed is the vice president did say that he kind of stepped back a little bit, that we could substantially set back the nuclear program, which is much different than ending the nuclear program. That could have been a misstep, a misquote on what he meant to say, but it does tell us that we are not at a deal, at least as of this hour.
And, it's just interesting because, of course, they're not paying attention to state-run Iranian messaging that's coming from them, but from the ancillary chambers, we hear them saying things like, by the way, the Strait of Hormuz deal is not between us and the U.S., it's between us and other countries to figure out how we want to do that. And this whole thing about opening up the Hormuz is one thing, but the nuclear weapon issue, it kind of gives you a pause and you go, are they really on board with this or not?
Yeah, look, I don't think so at this point. Remember, just 48 hours ago, Iran was sending out boats into the Strait of Hormuz, laying mines. The United States responded in what they call defensive measures to destroy those mine-laying boats. When you lay mines in a strait, that is an act of war. The strait is not owned by a nation. International law is very clear. That is open to all for free traffic. So Iran is consistently trying to focus and push their muscle. They lobbed today at one of our military bases. I believe it was Kuwait. So they still have significant capability. At the same time, their government, really run by a hardline Ayatollah. We killed the father. The son took over. We understand we killed the wife and the child of the new Ayatollah, who's significantly maimed. But he's not communicating directly, at least with us. We are dependent on negotiators to travel to Qatar to then have that information relayed. There's obviously a time lapse going on between these negotiations as well.
I think it's important to note that you mentioned some of the fire that's been, spouted off just in the last 24, 48 hours, yet we're talking about a ceasefire, it being delicate. It seems as though the definition of a ceasefire is really depending on who you talk to, because this doesn't seem to be much of a ceasefire when you have missiles in the sky.
This is not a ceasefire, at least I think by the common sense perspective. When you've got an adversary firing at your base, putting mines in the Strait of Hormuz, that's why I think you're seeing some frustration within the president's own ranks. His former Ambassador Bolton, his former national security advisor, very critical of this deal. I think, from a political perspective, putting my hat on that way, the Republicans, the president, are looking at the midterms coming up. and the cost of fuel, the cost of tickets. Those are all going to play into, I think, these decisions. What I'm afraid of, we don't want to rush into a bad deal, but again, we do not know all the details. What we do know is right now, Iran is not playing by any of the rules from a ceasefire, at least from that perspective.
It's going to be important to note every step of the way what happens. President Trump today talking to CBS News saying essentially midterms aside, he's going to make sure that no matter what, they don't get a nuke, even if gas prices stay high. It's going to be a long road ahead, perhaps. We'll be here every step of the way, and we'll do it with your help. Dr. Paul Chabot, good to see you. Thanks for sharing part of your Friday night with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.